Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Secure Talk. My name is Mark Schreiner, and I'll be your host for this episode of Secure Talk. Today, we're going to be talking to Eric Olden, who is the CEO of Strata. Strata is the first distributed identity platform that solves the problem of fragmentation through a no-code software solution. And we're definitely going to touch on that because there are a lot of words in there that I need to unpack and to get an understanding of. But I want to give you a little bit more background about Eric. He's an enterprise cloud identity expert, serial entrepreneur. He has done a lot of work in the identity and access management space. He founded, scaled, and successfully exited both Securant / ClearTrust and Symplified, the first identity as a service company. He recently served as the SVP and GM at Oracle, where he ran the identity and security business worldwide. And he was a co-author of the SAML standard, creating the first pre-integrated SSO platform. He's also wrote a new standard called IDQL, which solved the policy compatibility security issues between multiple clouds. There's a lot there that we're going to talk to Eric about, and some more things like multi-cloud resiliency and continuity. But before we do all that, let's say hi to Eric. Eric, how are you today?
I'm good, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Hey, so whereabouts are you located?
I'm in Boulder, Colorado.
One of my favorite cities. That whole area of the country is so nice, you know? How's the weather out there right now?
It's spring. It is nice and bright, but it's still very cold. So crisp, I think.
And what's cold for you? I'm sure it's colder than for me. I'm on the West Coast up in the Seattle area. So we get cold. It's like, oh, it's 40. Oh my God, it's cold.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. My kids, they were raised in this condition. They'll go out in shorts and it'll be 12 degrees. And
kids, man, kids.
That's cold for me. I wouldn't be doing that. But
no way at all. You know, there's so much in the show notes here that I would like to get an understanding of. So if it's all right with you, we can just jump right in.
Sounds great.
So I think if we start, before we get into multi-cloud resiliency and continuity and what the things that Strata does, could we just back up and maybe you can give the quote unquote background on the different identity and access standards?
Yeah. So the standards have been part and parcel of identity since the mid 90s, and all things like Kerberos and so forth. And they opened up to new markets so that interoperability could happen in a way that you didn't have to worry whether the stuff you built here is going to work over there. And so I think a lot of the early standards, like what we did when we introduced SAML in the 2000 timeframe, was to kind of make it possible for organizations to securely trust one another and share sessions and user activity between, say, a credit card benefits program and the travel agency that they sell something to, right? Mm-hmm. So the one has to trust the other. And when the user goes from one place to the other, they want to have that done securely and transparently. So standards were what made that possible, because with SAML, you could kind of have one vendor on one website and a different vendor on another, and it didn't matter because you could link your websites and your security models together. So that really, I think, set the stage for a lot of other kind of more recent versions and standards, but the derivatives and kind of other ones that are really key is the OpenID Connect. So if you're familiar with using your Google login over at some other website, and why do you do that? Well, a couple of reasons. For the end user, it's easy. Mm-hmm. You don't have to remember a password. You just click on it and hit accept. And if you ever are asked for a password, it's your Google password or whatever one you're using. So you don't have to think about another one. The other security thing is that on the receiving end, there's no password for someone to compromise. And the whole transaction is done using cryptography. So it's secure. And so, standards make that kind of thing possible because there's a lot of different ways to build a website. But if you support OIDC to come in, now you can have, millions of users be able to click and sign up for your service. So that's been a really powerful accelerant of getting identity spread out more. And then the more recent ones have been a response to the complexity of multi-cloud, because now with multiple clouds, for instance, very common to have a company use Amazon for some workloads, AWS,
Yep.
and use Azure from Microsoft for other workloads, and have a huge amount of application stuff that they have in their data center, their on-prem world. So in that very common example, we work with hundreds of enterprises, and this is the pattern we see time and again. I think Gartner says something to around 67% of enterprises have 2 or more clouds. So, it's a very common situation where you have these different places, but as an organization, you want to have consistent security, right? You don't want to have one policy that handles things in a certain way different on a different cloud. And so the problem in making that happen is, if you think about it metaphorically, that Amazon is written, it speaks Spanish, and Azure speaks English, and your on-prem stuff is in Japanese. And you need to say the same thing across all of these different places, express a policy, right? A rule. And the challenge is that you got to translate and do all of that. It's not consistent. So a new standard that we created is called IdentityQL, or IDQL. And what that does, it allows you to create one common generic policy in a human readable format that you can then express consistently across all of these different clouds, because there's open source software that'll translate IDQL into the native policy of Amazon and Azure and your on-prem system. So what that's done is it's really opened up the portability, right? You can now move things around, because if it makes sense to move an app from one work cloud to another, then you don't have to redo the identity, because it's the same policy. And so you're able to kind of swap identity providers and move across clouds, because all of the rules have been made consistent. So that's kind of I think the latest generation that we're really excited about here on
Thank you for that. That was an awesome explanation. And when you ever retire from being a serial entrepreneur, you should think about being a professor or a guest lecturer at least. Okay, seriously, that was awesome. How does one go about developing, writing, and creating, and then getting people or other companies and organizations to adopt a new standard?
Well, I think the first thing that we did, both in the SAML days, the early days, and now more recently, the difference between the two, how we ran the projects, was that now in 2023, open source is assumed. People understand what that means. Whereas in the late 90s, early 2000s, open source was just kind of coming out. And the reason I bring that up is that any standard that is out there, one of the first things that you need is a reference implementation of it, mm-hmm. right? Otherwise, it's just a great idea. And so the kind of advantage of building in 2023 is that we took the time to build a reference implementation and give that away for free. And we designed that so you can basically implement the standard and do it in a really easy way. And mm-hmm. so I think that was a real important part of it. But if I back up a little bit further, right, you asked the question, how do we get this started? And the first thing that we did was talk to a lot of companies and ask them, what are your biggest challenges right now in a multi-cloud? So we surveyed a lot of organizations to see what was the problem. And this policy fragmentation thing came up. And so we said, all right, well, here's the hypothesis, is that if we could do something like a universal policy model, would you implement it, right? And the customer is the one who has to say that they're going to do it. Otherwise, again, it's not, yeah, it's a great idea, but is it actually going to get put to use? So we found some really great use cases that came out of those conversations, and people joined the working group. And so we then expanded the thought circle to a lot of the practitioners, and then we went to other industries and consortiums. For instance, one of them is the MEF, the Metro Ethernet Forum, and they're the standards body that does Wi-Fi, for instance. And we were talking with them, and they're looking for a standard to extend the network into the identity world. And so I said, well, maybe get on board with this IDQL and bring your thoughts, and we'll shape it to fit your use cases as well. So you get that groundswell, and that's what you're really learning is do people care? Does it matter, right? And
Sure.
if you can't get that groundswell, probably not worth putting a whole lot of energy into it. But we had a ton of support early on because this is a really thorny problem. And then we started, wrote up, you got to manage the intellectual property. That's an important thing with these kind of standards in open source. So, we took care of that with lawyers and packaged all of the patent work around that to make sure that we can contribute it free and clear, right? So the separation is well understood and all of that. So once we had all of that in place, we then started doing these boot camps, and we brought everybody together into Boulder, and it was a huge amount of fun. We filled up this conference room, and it wasn't just people from my company, but there was 4 or 6 of us, but there was probably a good 20 other people that were just wanted to get involved and help. It was really exciting because when you get a group of people together and you structure the problem solving, we say, hey, here's the hypothesis. Let's break it down as a group. It was great ideas were flowing, and it was just really exciting. And then we turned our attention to, okay, we need to do a parallel path of develop the standard. And that is done by writing a specification. And then also let's build a reference implementation. So we had to create a kind of a organization to push the open source software that we were developing, and my company sponsored it, the financials behind it. And then other people started to contribute to the open source, right? And so the community started to help on that as well. So it was kind of a lot of community building. And I think that's a lot of conversations, a lot of, being open-minded, because I think if all you want to do is one thing, then, you're not going to get that far. And I think the exciting part for IDQL has been that now with the release of the specification, we also brought the software into an IP organization called the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. So part of the Linux organization. And so they basically handle all the other stuff in terms of intellectual property and in organizing that. But it's part of the organization next to Kubernetes and OPA. And our intent with that was to bring a standards-based open source solution for identity that would fit really well if you're using OPA, and if you're running your applications on Kubernetes. Odds are it's a cloud application. Odds are it will be multi-cloud soon if it isn't already. And so if we can kind of build that play set, if you will, where all the pieces work together, and then people who want to build things don't have to reinvent anything, that's where I think the implementation of the standard is exciting, because we have, thousands of downloads of it. And what it's doing is allowing us to kind of test the market, right? And rapidly
find feedback, right? Yeah. So again, I want to go back just a bit. I'm envisioning that initial gathering that you referenced with 4 or 5 people from your company and maybe 20, 30 other people there. And I'm just curious, what kind of process do you use to kind of guide that type of conversation? I mean, because you're introducing an idea, you're also, allowing for brainstorming. You have to kind of keep some structure. did you use some kind of system for that kind of meeting, or what works for you?
Yeah, that's the way we kind of got the whole team together. There are a couple things. One, I wrote this white paper that kind of laid the problem statement out in the hypothesis and some suggestions on how this might work. And that's what we used to get the team together to say, yeah, let's work on that together. So we had a kind of a common understanding of the problem because of kind of the contextual background on that white paper. But when we were in the room itself, it was, let's start at first principles. What are we really trying to do? And what is the outcome? What does success look like? And just iterating through that was really great, because I think there were one of the hardest things we had to solve, though, is chicken or the egg, right? Like, how do you write a specification for a standard, and how do you build a standard that needs a specification? So it was kind of, and what we did is just went and wrote software. And so we figured out, if we can't write it in software, then we're not going to be able to figure out, on the other side of it. So when we got it to work, it made it clear, the chicken or the egg. Well, the chicken came first. So.
Okay. I always thought so. I was
chicken guy myself. Yeah. So anyways.
Yeah. And then earlier you gave a very, I guess, basic use case where you have an organization that is using Azure and AWS. But then later on, you said you were speaking to some companies or organizations that had some very interesting use cases. And so maybe you can give an example of something that was interesting, and it was really just a problem or puzzle waiting to be solved.
Yeah, I think one of the really interesting things that we saw was, the basic use case that I shared was multi-cloud, where you have think about it on an east and west axis, right? Where you go left to right, and these are your different clouds. So you've got the same problem in different targets, different clouds. And when we were working with practitioners who were building these cloud native applications, they were saying, look, we need identity through the stack, not just across these clouds. So it became important to think about the northwest or north-south axis. And so thinking about not only how users access applications, but how they access data, how that is in turn over a network, and then how you can get into, other things within, like, functions as a service and APIs and so forth. And so that was really interesting, because then we shifted the model on 90 degrees, and we just said, hey, how is this going to work going top to bottom? And it all fell together really nicely, because of the kind of pattern that we're implementing is an orchestration pattern. And so I think that's one of those things that we can implement on all of the different layers, and that gives us the consistency. But that was a big customer-driven, enterprise-driven use case.
That's huge. And I don't think I've ever been involved with something that complex, but it's really nice when somebody says, hey, we've got this problem. Because to me, that's an opportunity, right? A huge opportunity. And if you hear that across multiple organizations, you're like, okay, this is a serious opportunity. And if you can help them solve that problem, it's rewarding. Well, it's rewarding in multiple ways. Let me just put it that way. So back to where you're currently at, I think you said you've got a couple thousand organizations out there that are using the standard or experimenting with it. I'll let you choose the words, and then and you're getting feedback as you go, and hopefully that kind of I would guess accelerates the development process. So what are the next steps?
Yeah, so we measure the proliferation of the standard through two vectors. Three vectors. One being how many people download the Hexa tool, right? Because the only reason that you use that is for the IDQL translation. The other one is who joins the working group, because people who download it, there's a lot more of those than people who say, hey, I want to add to the conversation. I want to work on the next version. I want to write code. So on those contributor side, we accept everybody who comes in and expresses their interest. And we've got people from a lot of different organizations building extensions of Hexa to work with more clouds and work with more target systems in that north-south axis. So, the more of these connections and integrations that are done, the more that you can now use IDQL everywhere. It's kind of like we flip the script. We don't have to wait for the clouds to adopt IDQL because we built Hexa that makes the clouds adopt it, because of the orchestration. So that means it's accepted everywhere, everywhere that we build the integrations for. And that's the ongoing software work. And then the last part is the community within, the service providers and the other software companies. And we've had a lot of other identity companies say, hey, we want to build products that work with every standard because they want to extend the reach of their footprint. And so we've had really interesting collaborations with, some frenemies, to be candid, right? Some companies like, hey, we kind of overlap here, but it's in our interest to work together, because if we can make this work, it's going to work for everybody and it'll grow both of our markets. And in these kind of markets, they're so big, it's easier to grow the opportunity than to worry about, bumping into somebody.
Okay. Maybe you can explain a little bit about Strata then, in terms of how Strata fits into the conversation with IDQL.
Sure. So my company Strata, we are in the identity orchestration space. And that for us means that we're really doing two things. One is we solve this problem of integration that big companies have, where all of their different identity systems are fragmented and siloed. And so what we do is we use software to kind of integrate all of those things and make them work in a consistent way. So it's called an abstraction layer. And so this abstraction layer now, on top of that, we manage these things called identity flows. And this is a simple way to think about it, is how you orchestrate something across different multi-step experience and send them into typically an application. So, how does a user log in to access an application? They may need to first authenticate against a username and password. Later, or after that, because they're trying to access something more valuable, you need to up-authenticate them. So you want to run a biometric on your phone or face scan. And then assuming that works out, now we need to check their access control. And that might be in a Oracle database. And the next step could be that we need to issue them a new credential for some reason. And you can have a workflow that goes into that. All of those are ways that you orchestrate a user going through your different systems on their way to an application. And that all of those stops, if you will, on that flow are going into that identity fabric. So that's where you have all of your systems connected. And so you can really easily make that flow happen without writing any code or changing any of the applications, because it's all happening at the orchestration layer, as opposed to rewriting a bunch of applications because you want to change your identity provider. With this approach, you don't have to do either of those things. You just use the software. It abstracts your identity infrastructure from the app, and then you can mix and match under the covers, switch from old Oracle to modern Okta, for instance. And that's a huge game changer in the enterprise, because a lot of these old systems are end of life and they need to move these applications off at scale. So that's what a lot of companies are doing with identity orchestration. And as we look at the fragmentation on multi-cloud for policies, that's where we said, look, we can bring a lot of our expertise in orchestration to the open source world and make that implementation that's what we're really great at. And then we also make it possible to express the conditions in that IDQL. So we implement it here in our software ourselves. So it gives us, we eat our own dog food, if you will. And so, we'll be over time using that to extend into, governance of different identity clouds and things like that. But always doing it in a standards-based way. So that's our kind of commercial interest, is that if we find people who have that problem, they probably also have the other problem. So they can use one for free and then work with us on the other side of orchestration.
Excellent.
It's been working good.
Thank you. So let me ask you, when at Strata, when you are first engaging with a new prospective customer, I'm assuming that you're talking to their identity access management subject matter expert, or maybe a little bit higher up the food chain. What are the questions that you lead with, or what are the concerns that are top of mind for them?
Yeah, I was just at a industry event last week at the Gartner show, and I was talking with a big telco, and they were really interested. They'd seen our booth and they were asking, hey, well, what is this identity orchestration? Does it make sense for us? We're a big telco. And I said, well, there's 3 questions that you should think about. Number 1, do you have a complex environment? And they said, well, yeah, we've got dozens of different identity systems. We have all these subsidiaries. It's like all over the place. I said, okay, great. Number 2 is, do you have a problem both on-prem and in the cloud? Do you have a hybrid world that you're trying to secure? And they say, yeah, absolutely. We've got all clouds. And I think they said something like on the order of 7 different clouds, because they have a bunch of subsidiaries, the consumer facing business, and they've got the business enterprise facing side of it. So all this complexity. And then the third question I asked is, do you have scale problems? Because if it's just 1 or 2 applications, you're probably maybe overkill to put orchestration in. But if you have dozens or hundreds, or we work with companies who have thousands, then it is imperative you use software, because you just can't do the work manually, and that's your alternative. So the scale question really, I think, is the third dimension to look at. So complexity, hybrid, and scale. Those generally, if you answer yes to 2 or more of those, you're probably, should be looking at how orchestration could solve a bunch of your use cases.
And when you implement some sort of identity orchestration, how do you measure, what are the metrics for success, or for ROI, or for security enhancements, or whatever? What are people looking to achieve?
Yeah, a couple of the big business drivers. I think one of the main things is the use case for modernizing your apps and your IDPs. And the common problem is that large enterprise have been building identity in their environments for dozens of years, right? I've been doing this for 27 years. And there's a lot of stuff that exists on premises. And so when they're looking to move that to say they want to move these workloads to the cloud, they realize that the identity systems that govern those applications are stuck on-prem. There's not a cloud equivalent of the old first generation software. And so when they kind of go to look at, well, what does it take to lift and shift? We don't want to rewrite the app. We just want to move it to the cloud. And then they find that it's all intertwined, often with non-standards-based integration. And so it creates this challenge where you're trying to move your applications because you want to get efficiencies of the cloud, better security, and all of that, but you have to rewrite your apps. And so using orchestration, you break that lock-in, and the application doesn't know that it's no longer talking to the old system. The orchestration layer switches it to the new system, and the application is none the wiser. And so that's kind of a big way to save that rewriting of the application, which is typically $150,000 in 6 months. So that adds up at scale, right? 100 applications is $15 million. And, we work with companies that have hundreds, plural, even going into the thousands. So it's really that kind of, well, how do we do this? Because the problem is so big. A lot of companies don't know where to start. We recommend you just start with a handful of applications. And if it works, then extend the ROI. But the business driver is going to be that you can modernize, make your apps more secure, and do that without rewriting them. So you'll save all of that, retire your old infrastructure, and be able to do things with the new setup that you couldn't do with the old on-premises legacy stuff.
And when somebody they want to move forward, but they're kind of reluctant. I mean, typically you're doing a POC. I mean, you just said that you can start off with one or two apps and just see, and I guess check the results. And if things are working the way you need them to work, then you can just continue to deploy.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And we build our software in the cloud, so it's really easy to do. You just go to our website, click sign up, you're in free. You can run it for, we'll give you a full month for free, but you can always use it to deploy in different environments. We only charge you if you're deploying in production environments. But it's easy to set it up. You do your magic configuration in the cloud. You download this technology called the Orchestrator. It runs in your cloud, runs in your environment, and you basically think about pushing your configurations from the cloud, beaming it into this Orchestrator, and that works with this air gap model. So you don't have, that's the way to handle large scale distributed systems, right? You don't want to have a bunch of network connectivity coming back to the mothership. So we use this distributed model to kind of beam that configuration out in a secure way, but it allows our companies, our customers, to operate all of that in all of their different clouds. So one system can push security configuration to Amazon, to Azure, to Google, and stuff on-prem, all from the one orchestration console.
I'm just curious from a business point of view, and maybe slightly from a technical point of view, if you ever come across a legacy system that is much more challenging to bring on than others, and that if you do that, if you're able to solve that problem, then do you immediately go out and look for other customers who have that legacy type of tool?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the big enterprise applications are a really good example of this. Because they're usually have a very sophisticated way to log into Oracle financials naturally, right? It's your financials in the cloud. So the kind of last mile integration where the user's identity needs to get into that application, that presents a really challenging integration because of the complexity. And it's not just Oracle, it's SAP, it's, all sorts of the big packaged applications. The second thing is that you don't own that. You can't change the source code. You got to work with what they give you because, it's the commercial product. And so one of the things that we found using our orchestration is that we could basically decode what the Oracle type application needed so that we can securely pass that identity into the application. And as soon as we did that for one customer, sure enough, there's a bunch of others that say, hey, we've been trying to do that as well. And so we can just show it to them really quickly and say, hey, look, this is it. It'll take you 15 minutes to stand it up and test it in your own world. And that was something that this particular customer had been working on for almost 2 years. And they were just hit their head. And it was great because very quickly we were able to kind of pull that thorn out of their paw, metaphorically, and it's been great ever since.
Excellent. Hey, I mentioned earlier on that we were going to talk about multi-cloud resiliency and continuity. So if it's okay, we could just jump tracks there, and maybe we can just start with the definition of, what does that mean to you?
Yeah. So when you think about resiliency in the context of identity, the first thing to call out is that identity is mission critical. If your identity system goes down, your users can't get into your application. So kind of on par with network connectivity, your identity is right there because it's a runtime real-time system. And so what happens in a lot of these kind of distributed places where, for instance, a retail shop, like there's a big home improvement chain that's got stores in all these different places. And each of the stores is almost like you can think of it as a standalone data center, right? And they've got a lot of things that go back to the mothership and they're beaming information back and forth. And when their associates log in, they want to have access to, the point of sale register and the other inventory systems and things to run the business. Well, when they log in, they're getting checked against the cloud. And that all works fine until you have a disaster. Hurricane comes in, someone breaks the fiber optic line. Now you've got the store that's really needed more than ever. And you need to keep those applications running. But now the identity can't be pulled out of the cloud. And so when you think about resiliency, it's your plan B from an identity standpoint. And in the world of orchestration, what you can do is instead of basically point your orchestration to run to primary cloud, and if that's not available, then automatically go to the local identity cache. So now you're running on a kind of a backup that's local, and you didn't miss a beat, right? Your applications, they're still up and running. Your employees are still using their same authentication, but now you can keep that application without having connectivity to the cloud because you're looking at it something local. Storm dies down, network's restored, you automatically start failing back up to not failing, but you move your traffic back to your primary cloud and everything keeps running. So it's been really interesting to see that come up because it's not only in the case where you've got a natural disaster, but we found a lot of cruise lines have this issue, which was new to me. I didn't realize cruise lines have big data centers and everything's run with applications. And when they're at sea, there's no connectivity or is really expensive. And so being able to kind of run identity local to the cruise ship is a really killer app for that use case, and one that we had no idea. And once we talked to one cruise line, turned out all of them
have the same problem. Yeah,
cool.
no, that's a huge use case. I would just imagine, and not even cruise lines, but any shipping company or anything that's out there, because we're not in the middle of the Pacific, like you said, data is super, super expensive. So that's amazing. It's, I'm curious, because everything we've been talking about is, or at least appears to me, is to be B2B. What, if any, trends do you see with B2C identity?
Well, I think one of the most exciting things with the consumer-facing identity is our passkeys. And it's a standards-based protocol that is part of the FIDO initiative. And the short of a long, what it allows you to do is to link your identity, like your face scan, with a device. And that could be your phone, most cases, but you can also link it to your laptop. And instead of having it all with your company, you have that passkey can be linked to Apple and to Google and to Microsoft. So the big three tech companies got together and said, hey, we'll make this possible. We'll kind of all support it, from an Apple iOS to Android to the Windows laptop. So that's really exciting, because what that means is that you can, as a consumer facing, you're selling mobile phones, and you don't want to have someone have a password in your system. You can just say, look, we accept passkeys. And then when they're challenged to sign up, their phone has all the prompts that they are used to. They put their face in, maybe do a PIN, and now they communicated cryptographically with the mobile phone selling company, and all of that's done without trading passwords. So it's really exciting because passwords are the bane of so many problems, and that the sooner we get off of passwords, the better. And I think making this easy for the consumer to do the more secure route, where it's more convenient at the same time. You don't have to worry about a password. You don't have to fill out any your address and things like that. I think it's really powerful because it's putting the power, democratizing it away from, a handful of big identity providers to a way that we can do it in a free way using the device that you always have with you.
Totally agree. I hate passwords, and I love it when I go to a site or when I'm doing something with my phone, downloading an app, for example, and it just looks at me and says, "I guess we'll trust this guy," and or whatever the biometric is. For that particular case, it's just so easy and nice, and ultimately more secure. Especially if there's a couple factors. There's always a couple factors of authentication there. Well, hey, Eric. What if people want to get more information about the IDQL or about Strata? What would be the best way to do that?
Yeah, appreciate that, Mark. I think the best way to learn about Strata is on our website, and we've got a website is at strata.io, spelled strata.io, and we also have a kind of a special thing for our podcast conversations that you can get to at strata.io/podcast. And, one of the fun things that we do with that page, you'll see you can submit a use case and say, hey, how would you solve this with identity orchestration? And so we'll kind of show you how that use case can be done. And we have a good time with it. People try and stump us, I guess, is part of what I'm getting at. Yeah. And then on the standard, if you want to get involved, I would point you to the Hexa policyorchestration.org, long mouthful there. Just Google Hexa policy, and you'll find the site on the Cloud Native Computing website. That's another place to find it. And you can learn all about the software, and you can get access to the IDQL spec in the documentation there as well. And if you want to join that working group, there's contact information on that site as well.
Awesome, Eric. Well, hey, I really appreciate you kind of taking a step back and defining and explaining the standards, and then digging into IDQL. And I learned quite a bit today, and I want to learn more about identity orchestration. I'm going to be a subscriber to your podcast. So that's awesome. Thank you so much for your time. And I'd like to wish you a great remainder of 2023.
Thanks so much, Mark. I had a great time on the show today. Appreciate it.
Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance.